Avgouleas adds today financial stability, which not only has not always been a public good, but 200 years ago, I guess, or even later, was an unknown concept. But let's call all of those global commons or global public goods, i.e. goods which we all share. So how we should protect them, my learned ladies and lords, as a barrister would address the court? Well, Varoufakis provides, indeed, rough guidance. Refrain from trading ill-defined assets. Ashford comes in and says, well, even if ill-defined assets is a rough term, I can provide you with the general principles, which should be based on a new global social contract founded on roles and ideas. However, I'd like to add a third principle, a third tenet in Rawls's theory of justice, the principle of environmental protection for the sake of clarity and argument. But how do you protect them? How do you build this new social contract? There are so many vested interests accumulated. How do you cut the Gordian knot of vested interests in the absence of a modern-day Alexander the Great? Are we all doomed to fail? I have two answers to that. The next is to the next slide. The second at the end of my presentation. So are we doomed to fail? All we can do is gathering academics to debate issues forever, which is a rather stimulating and entertaining exercise for some of us. Well, there is hope because there is law. As a matter of fact, since the time of King Hammurabi, human societies, whether through democratic process or not, have been producing binding and enforceable rules. So law does have a place here, and a central place, as a matter of fact. So, law and sustainability, hang on. Let's think about human rights protection. There was nothing before the Second World War. The first, how did they know what was a human right and define it in the UN Charter of Human Rights after the Second World War? Why a human right is a less complex issue than sustainability. We'll see why we lag so much behind from the giants on whose shoulders we stand. The same applies to free trade. There was a time that there were tariffs. There are not tariffs anymore because of binding international law. The same applies to monetary stability. There was no IMF before the Bretton Woods Conference 1944. But how do we do it? Do we have the tools? And do we have the tools? How do you achieve the political consensus, as Stephen Hockman said? Well, not only we have the tools, but also we have new tools. The famous global administrative law to which Professor Floraitis referred to. But how do we do that? Explain us the process. Well, obviously there is the international conference process, but there is also the transnational regulatory networks process. Experts, bureaucrats, representatives of the great and the good, NGO busybodies, industry representatives. Somebody called it a sophocracy. But Avgouleas objected to that. He said that these are susceptible to capture as much as national governments by the regulated industry and the experts populating them. How about ethics? Isn't ethics in the title of this conference? How do you apply ethics to sustainability? What is natural? John Harris very honestly explained to us that he's not as young as he used to be, so he needs his eyesight to be enhanced. Eyeglasses. An enhancement of dated 600 years, which is on Peter Lachman's exquisite timescale of Earth's life, must be something like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, Peter? New international law institutions. That's the answer. Stephen Hockman's proposal for International Court of the Environment, which would be capable to enforce environmental dumping laws in order to foster global competitiveness, a point that Leonidas Eugenides raised so accurately in this room, pointing out to how, without having those laws and make them legally enforceable at a transnational level, you distort global competition and you create inefficient business outcomes. So what's the solution? What do I suggest? I suggest a new UN charter that extends to sustainability and financial stability and poverty eradication. And what role for scientists then? Isn't that what economists and lawyers will discuss? Not at all. Scientists will tell us how to do it. Both Nicholas and why they haven't been helpful. Because they haven't been vocal. That's why Nicholas Ashford asked his colleagues from MIT to stand up and be counted. And Linda Nielsen asked scientists to imitate the example of John Charleston. And what nonsense are you talking about? This is billions at stake. Really? Do you really think that deep water drilling was an efficient outcome for BP, for British Petroleum? Or some sword science was involved there? So, what is a global public good? Well, there are technologies to describe them. But how are you going to also say that they are ethical? Well, as far as I'm concerned, that I'm a lawyer, only what the charter says will be ethical, regardless of the theories, and that's a very positivist approach. But that's extremely restrictive. That's right. But every legal document also plays another role, signaling. There is no reason to be in any legal document in this world, my idea for a green fund, i.e. utilize financial engineering and financial innovation in order to facilitate green economy projects, green economy investment. There is no reason for any charter in this world to tell to investment funds that investing in microfinance projects is a good thing. And you know what? It's a very good thing because especially group loans never default. But who is going to put their money there? You and I, our pension funds, ethically minded investors. And who is going to draft those complex things? And with what authority? Well, the states do have authority to bind each other in a legally binding way, hence the European Union, hence the United Nations. Civil society, NGOs, and churches can help. But how are we going to do that if we are plagued by this G8, G20, G this, G that, which do not enroll stakeholders as the representatives from the shipping industry noticed? So, should we remain slaves of the special interest groups? And how can we unshackle our chains? How can we break our chains? Through knowledge. Through knowledge. There is an urgent need for a global economic council, as Joe Stiglitz was advocating a year ago for a global scientific council. And who is going to be there? Well, people who can do the job through a transparent way and making them accountable. But hang on, if it's so easy, why nothing has happened so far? Well, the obvious explanation is vested interests. Have you noticed an elephant in this room the entire 3 days? Its name is global financial crisis. I think it will lead us to outcomes that are both unforeseen and unforeseeable. And lots of the vested interests of today may not exist tomorrow. Look what happens to the Greek media. And when I mean the global financial crisis, I also mean the sovereign debt crisis. They are one and the same. What is the other reason, then, apart from vested interests, that holds us back? Poverty of original ideas. The lecturer is slavishly following the professor's writings in order to become a professor. Poor things. Lack of original thinking, lack of original thinkers. And I think that's what we try to do today. That's what we have tried to do all these 3 days, to show to everybody that the world, this country, the global scientific community are full of original thinkers who can make very serious contribution if they only are allowed to have their voices heard. And that, I think, was the biggest benefit brought to us by this conference. Thank you very much.
In fact, we have just at this moment run out of time. It was our intention, and perhaps we will try and do this for a few minutes, to turn to everybody here to do in much shorter length. Wasn't an implied criticism, Emilios.
But there was only 20 minutes. Just my allotted time.
To sum up what we've done and where we've arrived at, what we would like to do from this conference, apart from making available the proceedings, I'll come to you in just one moment, is produce an executive summary of what we've achieved and circulate it to everybody who has been here, along with the other records that we've made, including the downloadable podcast. And we also want to know if you have any suggestions for action points from this meeting for the future. Now, I can see George has already got answers to all of these questions.
I'll just say a few words, if I might. Can I have my microphone? My point has been, first, that what makes the system work is the authority of courts in order to do things which people do voluntarily without protesting. I think one of the greatest incidents of that which impressed me was in the Bush against Gore or Gore against Bush litigation. I voted for Al Gore. But the fact that the Supreme Court of the United States, in a somewhat inept decision, decided the case, and nobody was burning tires in the street, they weren't overturning tires, is a tremendous statement as the authority of important institutions, which here, with what's going on in the current crisis, to me seems somewhat lacking in Europe. Secondly, my point is that there are some decisions, like decisions whether or not it's more important to keep a factory open than it is to protect the environment, or some general practice one way or another, which requires huge cost-benefit analysis, judgment of political context and what have you. I don't think those are truly judicial questions, although I understand that judges make the law. Last point, and this is where I'm starting for my own work. A world in which the European Court of Human Rights can say that if what you see in public cannot be disclosed if someone protests, it invades his privacy because it does not concern a debate of general interest, which they did say in the von Hanover case, or the British courts in Campbell's case, that if you learn something that people would rather you didn't disclose,